So again, my name is Jen Birchfield, Northwest Indiana Urban Waters Federal Partnership Coordinator. I also want to give a thanks to Drew Hart with U.S. Forest Service, who is here, who really helped to arrange for the webinar. And of course, a big thank you to our speaker here, Molly Wilson, and thank all of you for taking the time to be here today. So welcome to our webinar, the City of Portland's Yard Tree Giveaway Program. This webinar is being offered by Community Calumet, which is a partnership of different alliance of different residents, not-for-profits, universities, government agencies, and businesses working together to create a more diverse, healthy, and sustainable urban forest for quality of life in the Calumet region. For those of you outside of the region, we're in the Calumet region of Northwest Indiana and Illinois. So this webinar today, again, being offered by Community Calumet, but of course in partnership with the City of Portland's Urban Forestry Division. So I did want to give that little plug for Community for those of you who are kind of in our region. I would love for you to learn more about Community, and I will post some links in the chat so that you can connect to us on Facebook, learn more about us on our YouTube channel, or of course, just email me at jbirchfield@pnw.edu if you would like to be added to our mailing list to get updates on the Community program and future webinars and learning opportunities. I would also encourage everyone, if you do have suggestions for webinars, one of the things that Community Calumet seeks to do is to build capacity and meet our partners' needs for urban forestry. So if you have any suggestions for future webinars, please feel free to type those in the chat or to email those to me. I believe we are going to hold questions until the end, just for organization. So if questions come up during Molly's presentation, you're welcome to type those into the chat or just kind of jot them down and hold them for the end. We will have plenty of time for question and answer. So the nature of the webinar today, so we do at Community recognize that a lot of the plantable space in our urban areas is private residential property. So tree giveaways are a wonderful way to address that and also a great way to engage the public in urban forestry. So with that, I'd like to once again thank our speaker, Molly Wilson. She is the Community Tree Planting Specialist for the City of Portland's Urban Forestry Division. This is her third year of running the Yard Tree Giveaway program. She also leads tree plantings with Portland students at their schools. Before moving to Portland, Molly worked for 10 years with the Neighborwoods program in Indianapolis, so a little bit closer to us here in the Calumet region, to plant and maintain thousands of trees around the city. And so with that, as I mentioned, please hold your questions or type them in the chat. We'll have plenty of time for them. And with that, I will go ahead and hand things over to Molly. Molly, thank you.
Thanks so much, Jen. Thanks, Drew, for having me here today. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Just to give you a little bit of background about City of Portland Urban Forestry, you'll notice that on my slides, it says Portland Parks and Recreation. So we are a division of the city, but we are operated under the Parks Bureau. And so while we do plant and maintain trees in our parks, that's a crucial part of the work that we do. We are also responsible for managing the city's entire urban forest infrastructure. So a bit of a background on Yard Tree Giveaway. So what the program is the opportunity to provide an affordable way for folks to plant trees on their private property. During the fall, we hold multiple events where people pick up their trees. And at these pickup events, we give people the trees, mulch, and watering buckets. We also provide materials and ongoing guidance for the maintenance of those trees. The tree owner is in turn responsible for the establishment, watering, and maintenance of the trees. This fall will be our 5th year for the program, and we have given away over 3,000 trees since 2017. So the program has grown over time. In 2017, we gave away 500 trees. This year, we planted a lot, about 1,500 trees. All right, there it goes. So the big question is why private property? So we're a city, so why are we encouraging planting on private property? And Jen touched on this, and that is that private property is a huge part of the urban forest. The urban forest doesn't just stop at right of way. And in fact, in Portland, half of our current tree canopy is on private land. So, and our canopy analysis shows that private property also has the highest amount of plantable space. So not only is it already covering a huge portion of our city in trees, it also has the most plantable space with about 60% of potential canopy cover. And most of that is in residential space. We also know, unfortunately, thousands of trees are removed in yards each year without being replaced. So that's an important component. And then a super important part is that space in yards is high quality space. It's often bigger, I like to say cushier, with less constraints than perhaps what a right-of-way tree is up against. So there is the greater potential for a healthier, long-lived tree. So how is the program funded? It is not funded through tax streams. Instead, it comes out of Portland's Tree Planting and Preservation Fund. So what this fund is typically in development situations, if a tree is removed, it must by code be replaced, or a mitigation fee can be paid into this fund. So the money from this fund can only be used for preserving or planting trees. And this is to ensure that we're replacing the lost canopy. So all of our planting programs are paid for through this mitigation fund. And it provides us the opportunity to get trees back in the ground where they are needed most. So we aren't restricted to certain areas of town. Once a tree comes down, we can make sure the trees are getting into the places where canopy is needed. So how it works. So we'll get into a little bit more detail of the program here. But before we get to the events, we have a lot of work that goes into outreach and letting people know about the program. So everyone who lives in Portland is eligible to get a Drivethru program. And really, it's just anybody that has an address in Portland can get a tree for that address. However, we focus our outreach plan in some priority neighborhoods. And for the last 4 years, we have measured those neighborhoods as low canopy or low income neighborhoods, and specifically the neighborhoods that meet both of those. Low canopy and low income. This year, we've redrawn our priority neighborhoods, including racial makeup of the neighborhood, along with income and canopy. But for the last 4 years, it's been the low income, low canopy neighborhoods we have focused on. And so what happens is every priority neighborhood or focus neighborhood receives direct mail. This has been our most successful form of outreach. And these are postcards that are sent to the priority neighborhoods. And they're sent out just as registration is opening. So every household in the neighborhood receives the information. We wait at least 2 weeks before doing citywide outreach. So in essence, people who get postcards get that first chance at registration. In these focus neighborhoods, we also put up signs in parks, connect with neighborhood groups and neighborhood leaders, and have gone door to door. And each year we're kind of coming up with new ways to get the information out. We attend events. This year we're looking at providing outreach packets. So folks can take a packet and let people on their street or in their neighborhood know about the program with the materials that we've provided them. So once registration slows, so after folks in the focus neighborhoods have had a chance to register, once that registration starts to slow, we then start our push to get the word out citywide. And this is done through social media. We do a press release every year, so we get some interest from newspapers or television news outlets. But I just wanted to share that this illustration here on the slide is one that was drawn by Wrapup. She was one of our tree monitoring, and I'll talk more about monitoring later, but one of our tree monitoring employees last year. And this accompanied a post about Doug firs. We had these illustrations for all of our large native trees. All right, so the nuts and bolts of how the program works. In early September, so a few weeks before the first event, people can register online for up to 2 trees per household. We also help many people register over the phone. So although it's online, we are available to answer the phone and help folks get registered. When registering, people take the Yard Tree Pledge, and that pledge is promising to plant and maintain the tree, and then also promising to let us check up on the tree. And then it confirms that the tree is going to be planted on private property and inside the city of Portland. Once they agree to the pledge, folks choose their trees. Last year, we offered about 20 different species, and I will get into the species in a little bit. They then choose their pickup location and time. And this year we will have 5 events for them to choose from. There is a good deal of work that goes into the registration process. So the setup of the registration form, as well as monitoring the registrations that come in, because we then need to send them the information about their event and when to pick it up and things like that. But it also means we have less of a staff need at the events. And provides for a really smooth event for both the staff and recipients who come. So it's kind of been worth it for us to put in the extra effort during the registration. It is ever evolving though. So on the day of the event, folks arrive at their time slot. Last year, due to COVID, we had to change up our events to be a drive-through, no contact type of event. And I do want to say Tree Philly and Tree Pittsburgh really helped us through this process as they had to do it even quicker than we had to do it. They had to do this in the spring. So they really provide a lot of insight for us in setting up this type of event. It actually ended up being extremely efficient. We got a lot of positive feedback about it. So the process is that folks drive in, although you can see we did have some bikers and some walkers pick up trees, which is always welcome. And once they kind of pull in, we check off their registration, we radio to our nursery, and then the driver is sent around to the nursery where they park and load up their trees. We found we can accommodate about 20 people per half an hour, and we tend to give away about 2 trees at each event. This past year, we saw a 20% no-show rate, which actually felt really good. It was actually felt like a pretty low number. And those trees just go back into the inventory for people to register for the next events, unless we hear from the registrant. They just go back into the inventory. Just wanted to share that as kind of an expectation piece that not everyone who registers shows up. So what do recipients get when they come to the event? They get 2 trees. Some folks only choose 1, but 2 trees, watering buckets filled with mulch. During registration, we also offer the option for a phone consultation with one of our arborists to help folks select the tree for their space. So a lot of people are kind of unsure about what they need or what they want, what fits in their space. We get people who have massive yards who think they can't fit a big tree, and we get people with tiny yards who really want a giant sequoia. So it makes for interesting and really great conversations with folks who are kind of unsure about what works in their yard. Instructions, we also offer instructions for how to properly plant and care for trees. These come in written form, as well as we have them online and some videos for folks to watch. We provide follow-up care reminders. So every year in the spring, I send out an email reminding folks it's time to start watering their trees and to mulch their trees. And then I usually send one out again in the depths of the summer, hoping folks are still watering when we haven't had rain in months. And this is usually when I hear from people after I send out these email blasts. I get a lot of response, people having questions about the health and the condition of their tree. Should I stake this? Should I do this or that? So all of this kind of provides these long-term relationships. We still hear from people who got trees the first year, still having questions, still wanting to do the right thing for their trees. So these built long-term relationships. So the trees, so what trees are people being given? We are focusing on large native and evergreen trees. So these are the trees that are going to be most acclimated to our climate. They're also going to be the easiest to maintain, and they provide the highest level of benefits for a person's home and neighborhood. So providing canopy, I mean, our goals are to provide canopy. So along with large native and evergreen, we're also looking for drought tolerant trees. If they aren't native, they should be trees that can thrive in this climate. Some of our native trees include the Douglas fir, the Oregon white oak, and the ponderosa pine. Those are our real strong and steady trees. Some non-natives that do really well here that we give away are the silver linden, the London plane tree, and the European beech. We have a whole list on our website, but I'm also happy to share that list with anybody who's interested. And the trees generally come in a 5 to 10 gallon size. So that's the 5 to 10 gallon size pots. And this is for ease of loading and transport. So you can see the folks at the top of the screen putting that tree into their car. So if we get too much bigger than that, it becomes tricky. People feel like they need to rent trucks, things like that. All right, so I want to touch on accessibility. We have been working on making the program as accessible as possible. And earlier when I was talking about outreach, I mentioned that we send postcards to the priority neighborhoods. When possible, we also hold the events in priority neighborhoods. That was a little trickier last year when we were trying to rework our program to be a drive-through. But we want to make pickup as easy as possible for the folks in these focus areas. Also, last year for the first time, we offered delivery to 2 of the priority neighborhoods. So the postcards in these 2 neighborhoods specifically promoted free delivery. So when they went to register, they could put in their neighborhood code and get free delivery. And it worked. We delivered 200 trees to these neighborhoods. So the neighborhoods together, these 2 neighborhoods, they're right next door to each other. They make up about 4% of the city, and they received about 19% of the trees. So just offering this delivery made it super accessible, super easy for people to get these trees. And we, a little later in the season, used staff just to deliver to homes, and we delivered all the same things that they would have received at the pickup event. So those mulch buckets and planting information. So this heat map, I want to mention this here. So this shows where trees went across the city. We had a pretty good spread around the city, as you can see in blue, which I like to see that the word is getting out. The bright yellow are the areas where the most trees went. That largest blob there on the right is the focus neighborhood that we delivered to. The second large yellow area, the one that's a little lower down to the left, is one of the neighborhoods where we held an event. So that neighborhood got postcards as well as holding the event. And we have seen over the years that the neighborhoods where we hold the events end up with the most trees. So that's why it's important for us to focus in those neighborhoods. All right. So continuing with accessibility, some other elements of the program include planting for folks with limited mobility. So this is separate from delivery. We planted for 60 folks, or we planted 60 trees for folks with limited mobility, and anyone can receive this service no matter where they live in the city. We don't limit this to the focus neighborhoods. Another form of accessibility is language. Our flyers and planting materials are translated into 5 languages. On top of that, we try not to use words or prefer not to use words like homeowner, because we don't want to exclude renters. So we don't have as many renters come pick up trees as homeowners, but we do have renters come, whether they're in a single family home or an apartment complex. We have renters who come, they've gotten permission from their property owner, and they're adding trees to their space, to their yard. We also have places of worship, businesses, and schools take trees. So everyone is welcome, and we want to make sure that we are clear about that. All right, so long-term monitoring. So we have the follow-up of the trees. We want to make sure that the program is successful. We want to see how the trees are doing. We want to see which trees are doing well. So we may stop using a certain species if we find that they're just not transplanting well. So with our monitoring, we measure growth and record health. And as I mentioned during the Yard Tree Pledge, people commit that we can come back and check up on the trees. So yard trees given out at the events will be visited each summer for their first 2 years, and then every 5 years after that. What we have found is after the first year, we find nearly 70% of the trees are planted and alive. So that doesn't mean that the other 30% are dead. We occasionally will find a tree still in a pot, but what happens is the vast majority of those remaining trees are people that we couldn't reach for permission, so we couldn't get into their yard. And they've probably planted them in the backyard behind a fence. We will monitor them from the street if they're visible, but So we may not have gotten permission, or what we often hear is, well, I gave my tree to a family member, or I gave my tree to a friend. So fingers crossed that those trees are still getting planted. We just don't have eyes on them. We still think that 70% is a great number, because we have no control over what happens to the tree after that tree is given away. So we're still really happy with being able to find more than 2/3 of the trees. So at year 2, what we have found when we visit those same trees is that 97% of them are alive and well. And actually 90%, I believe, are still in excellent and good condition at that point. So we're really happy with how the trees are faring. It shows that homeowners are, and I just use the word, it shows that folks are committed to taking care of the trees. And then we will come back in 5 years, or at the 5th year that the tree is in the ground, to get the survivability at that point, and we'll report back. So next year is our 5th year for the first trees that went out. So we will know next year how the trees are faring at year 5. And one thing to just kind of touch on is that with the 70% of the trees that we're finding, and also, one, we don't have control over what happens to the trees after they're gone, but also we find that the trees cost us about, if we include everything, if we include the monitoring costs, all the materials, labor, staff salaries, the staff who go out and monitor, the vehicles that they have to use, all these things, the trees end up costing about $140 a piece for all of that time, for all of the materials. And so it's a pretty low cost. And so we're really happy with that number of trees, being found and in the ground and alive. And then obviously with the hope that the rest are as well. We just haven't seen them. So it has felt pretty successful. We're glad that we're able to check up on our trees. And that's pretty much the program in a nutshell. I know that there are a lot of details, and so I'm happy to be available for folks wanting to talk through any of those details. I know we're going to take some questions today, but feel free to email or call if you have questions, or really want to crunch some numbers. I'm happy to do that if you are interested in getting started with the yard tree program in your neck of the woods.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Molly. That was a wonderful presentation. And, I was jotting down my questions and you answered a lot of them as we went along. So great job. So we will go ahead now and open it up to questions. I have seen some questions coming in the chat. So I will go through and read off those chat questions to get us started. I would also mention, keep typing your questions as they come into the chat. You can also, if you prefer to speak your question, go ahead and raise your digital hand. I think there's a reactions icon at the bottom, or you can do it maybe under participants, raise your hand. And then at the very end, if we still have time, we'll just have everybody unmute and let it be the Wild West of asking questions. So let's go ahead and start with the chat. And let's see, our first question is from Anna Maria, and she's asking, why not use bare root instead of containerized trees?
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually, the city doesn't plant any bare root trees as of this time. We don't have the ability to store bare root trees right now. And I think part of the concern, because I am all in favor of bare root, mostly for weight and size. I think they're really helpful for us when we're planting a lot of trees and for saving our backs, for sure. I think that for homeowners or for folks who are taking the trees away and planting them, they would need to be planted immediately. And I don't think that always happens. So oftentimes in early January, when I ask, hey, have you planted your trees? I get a lot of folks who respond and say, oh yes, I'm going to be doing that this week, or I'm getting to it. And they've had the tree for a couple of months. So I think that it's mostly the idea that bare root would need to go in the ground right away.
Great, thank you, Molly. And our next question, we have a question from Drew Hart, who is asking, who is growing the trees for the program? What kind of quality control is happening to ensure you're getting trees that are grown well?
Thanks, Drew. We have several different nurseries that we work with. Some of the local, so many of you may have heard of J. Frank Schmidt, that's out here near Portland. And then we have some other nurseries that we're using as well, Seven Oaks, regular places like that, we are able to go and check the nursery stock before we pick it up to bring to the giveaway. So we're able to check that nursery stock and say, hey, these aren't quite the size. I'm not seeing root flares, or I don't think that would be appropriate for a tree recipient to take and plant. And then we can make adjustments and changes. So it's checking that stock before it gets to us. And then also building these relationships with the nurseries. So our horticultural staff have these relationships with the nurseries, and knowing that these nurseries are going to provide us quality stock over time is really helpful. Occasionally we have to use a new nursery or find trees other places, and they come in and we have to assess if they're going to work for us. But there's definitely taking the time to make sure that we are giving folks quality trees that are not going to be problem trees in the future.
Great. Thank you. Next question, also from Drew. How do you ensure that the trees under power lines are power line friendly trees?
Right. So we have, let me just think. So when we're talking private property, generally we would be looking at high voltage lines that run along the right of way, or we do have several neighborhoods where the high voltage line runs through the backyard. In our materials, we talk about this, and we mention to folks how to measure out where your tree should go in relation to the high voltage lines. So in that material, we say, take the mature spread of the tree, which we provide when they choose that species, cut it in half and make sure you're planting at least that far from the power lines. And we do not provide the small trees. So if someone only has, if someone has no space in their yard, if there are high voltage lines running through the yard and there are no space, then unfortunately our program doesn't work. There are some other programs where they may be able to get trees for that size, but we only have the large growing trees. So hopefully being in yards, they have some flexibility and they're able to move away from those lines.
Great. Next question from Joe Exel. Do you require the ability to access the property for monitoring as part of registration? And also, do you have a monitoring period for trees, for example, 3 years?
Yeah, so for monitoring, we do have, so during registration, we have the archery pledge where we say, there's several check boxes, and one of them says, I will let urban forestry come back and check up on my tree each year. And I think some people just kind of, go through the motions and click on it and maybe don't necessarily think about that because they may not be sure, but plenty of people are aware. And when we show up, they know that we were coming. Obviously we call and send letters and things like that as well. But yes, so that is part of registration. And I think that's an important part of registration. So people are aware of it. And then as far as monitoring period, we will monitor the first summer after it has been planted. So the hope is that they're planted in the fall when they're received, and then we will start monitoring in July, that following July, and then we will do a second year in July again, and then we'll leave the trees and we'll come back at the 5th year mark for those trees.
Great. And Joe is also asking, and I think you touched on this with one of the previous questions, do you have a central city tree yard, or are trees coming from nurseries? So it sounds like they are coming from nurseries, but once you get them, how I guess is the storage then handled?
Yep. So trees are coming from nurseries, and so we store them at a maintenance yard that we have. It's our horticultural yard, so they have a lot of other plants and they have irrigation set up and all of that. So we store all of the trees there, and it is, so this year with 1,500 trees, I mean, it is a large number of trees, but we have the space to store those and keep them watered throughout the event. So we usually bring them in a week or two before the first event, and then keep them watered in that space until we have the events. And it does require the Friday before each event, loading up trucks with trees and then driving them out that next morning and setting them up at the event. So we kind of have that one storage place, and that's where we work from. So we load up the trucks and trees and move them out to the events as needed.
Great. And Anna Maria is asking, how come the survival rate of 73% in the first year went up to 97% in the second year?
That's a great question. And it's always so hard when we put these numbers on paper, because it's a little hard to kind of wrap your head around when we're looking at them written. But it is that the first year we lost about a third of the trees because we weren't able to access the property. So it's not that the tree died, it's that we didn't get permission to be on the property. Or as I think I'd mentioned that some folks maybe gave their trees away, so we don't know where the trees are. So it's that's why it's a much lower survival rate, because we take all of the trees and 73% of them are available to us to look at. So the second year, we're only looking at that cohort of trees that survived or that we were able to see. So we've end of cycled the trees that we weren't able to access. We never asked those people again. We just focus on the trees that we initially had access to. So that way we can see the mortality rate. And so that's why the second year, the 97% seems much higher, but it's just because we're only focused on the trees that we were able to access the year before.
Great. And Dahlia is asking, how do you convince low income, low canopy residents that planting a tree is beneficial?
That's a great question. And it's just having conversations with folks. And the nice thing about this program is that there's no pressure to plant trees. So we just, on all of our materials, we just, mention the benefits, whether that's, I think different people gravitate toward different benefits. So whether it's shade or cleaning the air, beautifying, reducing crime, reducing noise. I think folks have, slowing traffic. I think folks have different reasons why they would want to plant a tree, but it's just getting that message out and then answering people's questions. And a lot of that happens at events, like when we go to fairs or festivals, and we are at events and people come up to our booths, and we just talk to folks about why it's beneficial. And I think that we get a lot of really good response, and we also get people who are just like, oh, I still don't, want the upkeep or the maintenance or to rake leaves. And in that case, that's okay. The idea is just to get some out to the folks who do want them and who do see the benefits in them, and then they benefit, the community as a whole. Great.
And another question from Drew: how many staff people would you say is required to run this program?
So I am full-time on this myself, and then another of my coworkers helps with the delivery end of things. So another full-time coworker helps for a couple of months with the delivery end. And then we hire, this year we're hiring 4 seasonal employees to help us with monitoring. So they're full-time during that summer monitoring. And then those seasonal employees also help us with running the events. So being at the events to get people checked in and registering. And then the events can be either volunteer or staff. So we've done both. We've had full-time staff help out at the events, and we've also staffed the events with volunteers. So and that's kind of up in the air. But I would say that the majority of it is maybe 1 full-time staff and 4 or so seasonal employees.
Great. It looks like we have made it through our questions in the chat so far. So with that, I will go ahead and turn to the raised hands that I see. And I do see Zuli. You have your hand raised. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, hi. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a wonderful presentation. I really want to acknowledge you. One of the areas in particular is the level of areas accessibility. Definitely, like I said, it sounds like you're doing a lot, and I thank you very much for that. I know that Portland is very active in just the advocates. One question regarding the delivery of trees. You mentioned those with physical mobility. Could you mention or elaborate if you have any data on that, what percentage, and of those that are home delivered, as well as how about individuals who have low vision or blind, other types of disabilities? Were those included? I know that those probably overall when the delivery, but do you have any kind of breakdown or any kind of special request when it came to that?
So I didn't, sorry, I'm just doing some quick math here. So we, as far as numbers or percentages, so last year we did, we planted 60 trees for folks with limited mobility. And so that ended up being about 5% of the trees were planted for folks. And we do not have a breakdown of why they needed the planting. So we don't ask, we don't require any sort of, confirmation or anything like that. It's just if they click that, I need help planting, I have limited mobility box, then they go on the planting list. So absolutely physical, mobility, or as you mentioned, vision loss, all of that would be included. We absolutely are happy to do this for anyone who needs the help. But right.
Got it. But there's no one in particular that would request and say, need assistance or the accommodation, or even for reading the materials that you send out, making sure that there's the statement for accommodation, for calling, for the. I'm just trying to get to when you talk about accessibility, just even the definition I was trying to capture, making sure that it's just not the usual. That it's usually just like a broad accessibility versus really what, in terms of the disability community, we know what accessibility means. That total
right.
accommodations, implementation, inclusion, the whole thing. I'm just curious.
Right. So I guess, are you asking how clear are we about the message that this is available?
Yes.
We put it on, so on our direct mail that goes out, our postcards about the program, we say, planting for folks with limited mobility, let us know how we can help. So it's on all of our printed materials. It's also when you register, it's a clear box. You can choose to pick up at an event and then it says, I need urban forestry to help me plant these trees. And then you check this box and then we immediately respond with a confirmation email that says, you have checked this box. We will be in touch with you when we will be out to plant your trees. So, and I think, with the fact that we had 60 people, it was the most we'd ever had asked for that service last year. And I think, I suppose that shows that it's being used. It's clear that it's working. I haven't had, anybody say otherwise or give us feedback that, they would like that service and not having realized that it was available. And then we also, there's language access statements, all over. I know we can always get better with language and being available for folks whose primary language is not English. That's something that we're continually working on as well.
Usually, thank you so much. No, usually it's because readers sometimes cannot read. There's a few things are in PDF and so on. So making sure that complies with the W3. And so just curious about that. It sounds like great. It'd be wonderful, to continue to expand. But it's great to hear or know that something is working. And sometimes we say we don't, because if people are not showing up or not asking, it's because the information is not actually being accessible or not being available to them. So that's another indicator. Not that there's no interest or there was no request, but somehow we're missing that part. But no, it sounds great, fantastic, congratulations, and thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And if you don't mind, I would love to chat more about it and just make sure that one, that I'm like fully understanding, and that that it really is accessible, that people know. I always want to make sure that that those parts of the program are available and that people understand that they're available. So I'd be happy to talk with you more about that as well. Just
sure, thank you. I'd really love to. I'll send a chat. I don't know. I'm on the phone and I'm not able to see where to enter the information.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yes. So I wonder if Jen, if you can help us connect.
Yes.
Yes, please. That would be great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jen.
I can definitely, I'll make a note to connect the two of you after the webinar, but thank you so much, Zuli. Zuli is one of our local partners here, and she's just been a wonderful resource for our partnership, always very patient with me when I have questions. So thank you so much, Zuli, and I will definitely connect the two of you after the webinar.
Great, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yep, thanks for being here. I do see we have another question in the chat from Joe. He's asking, could you share what info is included on registration and the pledge?
Yes. Let me.
And whatever you have handy, but I will also note that we will send a follow-up after the reminder with the meeting, a link to the meeting recording, and if there are any additional materials that people would like to see that you're willing to share, we can include those as well.
Yeah. So I'm going to put this link in the chat. This is the link to the registration form from last year. This is not the one we'll use this year, but it will be generally the same. And we are working on a little I don't know, a form that's maybe a little easier to use, but we're using Smartsheets right now. Okay, so that's the registration form from last year, if you're interested in clicking on it. But the first thing, it talks about kind of the requirements. And then the first thing that folks read is the Yard Tree Pledge. And so we're asking folks to watch the How to Plant a Tree video. We ask folks to commit to watering 15 gallons of water per week for at least the first 3 years. The next one is contact urban forestry or tree care professional if you have questions or concerns about your tree. The next one is return the tree to urban forestry if I cannot plant it. We did, I would say, about 3 people return trees this year. That does happen. And again, they just go back into the inventory and we give them away. Plant the tree at the address that is provided inside city Portland limits. Plant the tree on my property, not in the planting strip or in the public right of way. Plant the tree in the ground, not in the container. So just encouraging folks to take all of that, the container material off of the root ball. The next one is ask permission from the property owner to plant the tree if I am a renter. The next one is allow urban forestry to monitor the tree's survival and health once a year. And the final point is keep the tree alive and in good health to the best of my ability as long as I am the property owner. And then just confirm that you've read and check. So that's the rundown of that Yard Tree Pledge. Oh, good. You have it pulled up. Sorry, I didn't realize that. I had it covering the screen.
Oh, no. And I'm just kind of scrolling down so
great.
folks can see kind of the rest of the form.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would love to. We have a link on there, for like tree species to go back. You kind of have to go back and forth a little bit. The goal would be to get a more formal website where it's more like tiles. People can click on the picture of a tree and register for that tree, but it's coming someday.
Okay, I'm going to stop the share and just take a look at the chat. We're seeing an incredible program. Thank you from Jerome. And I'll do another check to see if we have any raised hands. And not seeing any in the chat or raised hands, I will say let's go ahead and go Wild Wild West and give everyone permission to unmute and just chime up with any other questions that you might have.
want to say thanks so much, Molly. This was really helpful. This was something that when I heard about the program, Jen and I think Jen had spoken to you earlier and shared it with me as well. And I just thought this would be a really great program to see here in Northwest Indiana. So really do appreciate the time that you've shared with us this morning. This is really inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to be here. And I have felt so good about this program just from the beginning. So again, this is my third year doing it, and I feel really, it seems very positive, and it's a really, connecting people with trees. Yeah, it's a really nice opportunity for people to plant in the yard and get the help when maybe they're a little unsure of what to do. This comes with that help along with a free tree.
Great. Any other questions, comments for Molly? We're seeing a lot of great feedback in the chat. A lot of thank you, great training from Dahlia, from Anna Maria.
I guess I'll just mention, the Forest Service Great Lakes Restoration Initiative grants, which are out right now and will be due July 8th for Northwest Indiana and parts of Calumet in Illinois. The Forest Service does support tree planting on private property as long as there is no adequate public property that the tree can be planted on. So if the tree planting area is not sufficient enough, we support planting in usually front yards. So if this is something that your community is interested in applying for, feel free to reach out to Jen or myself, and we can certainly make sure that you have all of the information you'll need to apply for that grant, the GLRI grant. So I think that there would be probably other possibilities. I don't see Andrea Nichols with NIPSCO on this webinar, but I think NIPSCO also has programs that would support planting on private property as well.
And for those of us who may be from outside our region, because I did see a few registered, NIPSCO is our utility here in Northwest Indiana. And a great partner to Community. Okay, final call for questions. Hearing none, I will go ahead and wrap up the webinar. One more time, I just want to thank Molly so much for taking the time, for this wonderful webinar. Just follow up after the recording. As I mentioned, I will be sharing the recording. And so everyone who was here today, you'll receive that follow-up email. Several have expressed interest in kind of viewing the webinar after the fact. So once again, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for being here, and have a great day.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks for having me.